I talk about the importance of checking inflation pressure in tow vehicle or RV tires all the time, but is your tire pressure gauge giving you accurate information? When I was in charge of some large fleet maintenance operations, one of my responsibilities was the tool calibration program. Certain tools required regular calibration to ensure accuracy. A tool every RV owner uses is a tire pressure gauge, but did you know when a tire pressure gauge gets banged and bumped around in your toolbox, it's easy to lose its accuracy? I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's start at the beginning. I always say you get what you pay for. Lots of inexpensive pencil or plunge type tire gauges you see at the auto parts store cannot be calibrated, and if the reading is inaccurate, the gauge is worthless. This is a tool you are using to see if the tire inflation on your RV is correct before leaving on a cross-country RV trip. That's why you should spend a little more and get a quality inflation pressure gauge that can be calibrated. Now, the question is, how can you calibrate your tire pressure gauge? To do it professionally, you would need some type of standard air pressure reference to measure it against. We all know that's not going to happen, so here are a couple things you can do to test your tire pressure gauge for accuracy. You can check the air pressure in the tire with the gauge in question and then check the same tire with another quality tire pressure gauge. If there is a significant difference in the readings, 3 or more psi, between the two gauges, one or both gauges might be inaccurate. On the other hand, if both gauges read within 1 to 2 psi of each other, the gauges are more than likely accurate. If you want a more precise method for checking the accuracy, you can purchase a master test gauge or take your gauge to a local tire dealer or fleet truck maintenance facility and ask them to check it against their master gauge. A master gauge is a gauge that is certified to be calibrated and accurate, but I caution you, not all tire dealers check or calibrate their own gauges on a regular basis. Tip: don't depend on pressure gauges at gas stations to be accurate. These are usually abused and neglected, raising concern over accuracy. There are several different types of pressure gauges available on the market. One important thing to keep in mind is the pressure the gauge is rated for. Most automobile tires are inflated to about 32 psi, so a 0 to 60 psi gauge would be sufficient. On the other hand, some motorhome and truck tires are inflated to 100 psi or more. It is important for accuracy and to prevent damage to the gauge that you get the right gauge for the job. A general rule of thumb is to find a gauge that can read double what the inflation pressure is set at. This isn't always possible, especially with tires inflated to 100 psi, so try to find a gauge rated for higher pressure, like 150 psi. Possibly the most common type of pressure gauge is the plunge or pencil type. Some of these are calibrated and some of the cheaper ones are not. As a general rule, a common plunge type gauge you purchase will be accurate to plus or minus 3 psi when it's new. Like everything else these days, things are going from analog to digital. Analog tire pressure gauges were the standard for many years, and some people you talk to swear by them, but advances in digital technology have improved on that standard. In numerous tests comparing different type gauges, digital gauges were the most accurate tested. Regardless of the type of gauge you choose, there are high quality and low quality gauges available. Buying a cheap digital gauge would be the same as buying a cheap pencil type gauge. Here are a few things to keep in mind when it comes to tire pressure gauges. Spend a few more dollars and get a quality tire pressure gauge. If the gauge will be used for checking dual wheels on a motorhome, the chuck end of the gauge should have a dual foot design to make the job easier. Always select a gauge rated higher than the inflation pressure of the tires you are checking. Applying more pressure than the gauge is rated for can damage the gauge and affect the accuracy. If you overpressure a gauge, have it tested for accuracy. Try not to drop or jar the gauge. Store the gauge in some type of protective covering or case and in an area where it won't get hit or damaged. Periodically have the gauge tested for accuracy. At a minimum, compare it to another quality gauge to see if both gauges read the same or close to the same pressure. Most importantly, once you purchase a quality pressure gauge, use it on a regular basis to check your tires. It would be more important to have a calibrated tire gauge if you were checking inflation pressure in race car tires, but even in a tow vehicle or an RV, properly inflated tires are safer, extend the life of the tires, improve fuel efficiency, and lessen the chance of unexpected and premature tire failure. Happy camping!